Trans women are women. Now that we've established that, my name is Artemis. Welcome to my thesis, Real Girls Talk Demonstrating Trans Women's Precarity, and welcome to the Honors Thesis Symposium on behalf of all of us. Let's get right into it. Today we're going to go over four main things. Some definitions, so we're all speaking the same language. The problem, as I see it, which is a problem of a gap and an erasure. My project in form of a study, its aims, its results. But I want to go back to where we started. Trans women are women. What do I mean by that? I don't mean it as a social media slogan. I don't mean it as a pithy phrase. I mean it as a statement of material reality, a statement of what is real. And so to help you frame that, you can think of it socially, hormonally, if we're on HRT, politically, economically, biologically, by pretty much any definition, whether you go by the social construct or not, because again, HRT changes our sex, or in a word, completely. Trans women are women. Problem? We're women denied. More specifically, trans women are women facing patriarchy alone. And while facing patriarchy alone, we're denied access to women's supports, literature, resources, and institutions. And the intersectional effects of that denial demonstrates and maintains our precarity. So you might be wondering, okay, Artemis, what's precarity? I'm glad you asked. There's the standard definition or dictionary definition of precarity: a state of persistent insecurity with regard to employment or income. That comes from Oxford Languages. I pulled that in 2024. It might have changed. I don't know. Dictionaries are weird. Then from my literature review and diving really deep into the materials across academic disciplines on what is precarity, I came up with this extended definition: a social, economic, and political relationship wherein access to resources is tenuous at best, often denied, and always at risk for revocation. And then finally, we have the third definition for the purposes of my project, which is the transfeminized definition of precarity: a socioeconomic relationship of never having enough, even for basic survival needs, which is enforced, and I stress enforced, through social, legal, political, and economic mechanisms. So these are the three definitions of precarity, but to do a study, you need a little more than that. So I came up with, in the grounding of my study, 26 forms of precarity from a combination of literature review, lived experience, and what I call bleeding edge feminist discourse, or intra-community conversations. All 26 forms, and defining them would be its own topic. So for this, it's enough to say there are at least 26 forms, one for every letter in the alphabet, of precarity for trans women. And they all interlock, they all exist at once, and they all force us onto the edges we live in. Which brings me to the 6 themes, which is the more important takeaway of precarity. We have social, legal, community, rhetorical, bureaucratic, and economic. If we look at the dictionary definition of precarity, economic is the primary definition, but in my argument, all these other themes of precarity exist to interlock, intersect, and create a much more, unfortunately, robust system of domination and oppression. Which brings me back to the literature. This is from a feminist who I'm in conversation with. Her name is Talia Bhatt. She said in a writing of hers, and I quote, "Sex is not quite as binary as advertised, because the heterosexual regime," that does not work, "has always regarded people as one of human, broodmare, or freak." Now what she's getting at is that gender is a hierarchy. It's not a binary. It is not an even distribution. Even in our social structures, it's always been a hierarchy. So, continuing with the lit review, I found not a lot. I found a lot of erasure, and I found this kind of, what I'm arguing is a cycle that comes from that erasure. We have limited literature available from outside the discipline that I'm studying, women's studies. We have bad assumptions within that literature. Within the discipline, we have a lot of epistemic erasure, a lot of non-trans women talking about what it must be like to be a trans woman, but never talking to or being in conversation with trans women. And me as a trans woman being in this room, being in the academic environment, going into grad school is incredibly rare, not because trans women are less capable, but because we've been forced out of the room of knowledge production. So that leads to poor knowledge, that leads to harmful discourse, that feeds right back in on itself. That being said, this is an academic project, so of course I had to find some literature, and what I found was an incomplete picture, but what we can see is that there's the deepest wage gap for trans women, the highest rate of murder victimization within the LGBT community. If you don't already know, LGBT people in general are highly disproportionately at risk of being murdered or hate crimed. On the topic of hate crimes, we're 6 times more likely to be subject to police violence if we survive the hate crime in the first place when we try to access the processes that follow. We're more likely than trans men to be forced out of the labor force, and we're far, far more likely than trans men to be forced into sex work. Like I said, this is a murky picture at best. So that's where my study comes in. That's where my methods and my purpose comes in. My purpose was pretty simple. Demonstrate the precarity that trans women face using trans women's words. Now, the way I did that was a bit more complex. I took a mixed methods approach, which means qualitative and quantitative. It means using techniques from social sciences and my other discipline of rhetorical studies. And it means the quantitative data had Likert scales. If you've ever answered a strongly agree to strongly disagree question, that's a Likert scale. I also had yes, maybe no questions, and demographics pulled from the 2015 edition of the US Trans Survey. For those who are not familiar, US Trans Survey is the biggest and in many ways the only major data gathering instrument on the trans community. It comes out every 5 to 10 years. Qualitative, I had structured interviews. I had 12 questions I asked my respondents. They could say whatever they wanted, so it was a semi-structured process. I had no expectation of what they would say, and then I took what they said and I turned it into narrative and I coded it according to rhetorical studies methods to reveal themes. In doing this, I had 3 research questions. Do trans women feel at risk for the various forms and themes of precarity? In what environments are we most or least at risk? And are there crossovers or correlations between different demographic subsamples and the answers to the first 2 questions? The short answer is yes, we're at risk for precarity and we feel it. Second answer is in almost every environment, but we're gonna go into that in more detail. 33 to 51% of my participants, depending on the question, strongly agreed with the idea that they lost each of family, friends, professional opportunities, and educational opportunities on the axis of their transition. 55.4% said, hey, I've lost overall stability. Now for that, a shared definition was provided. And so that means they've lost overall access to food, water, housing, medicine, and basic human connection. 82.2% of my participants said, I'm at extreme risk in public right now. And we assessed 8 environments. In the workplace, 63% said the same. 84.9% said that their public spaces have become riskier and more harmful for them since the beginning of this calendar year. I think we can all venture a guess as to why if you're at all aware of the political currents, but the thing is, this isn't new. This precarity is something that's existed. It's a function of patriarchy. It's not a function of who's in charge of the White House. And 50% of participants experienced increased risks in their workplace since 2025 started. Now, of course, gender is not the only axis of marginalization. It is not the only line of division from which systems of domination and control are set up over us. So for those who are Black and a trans woman, the scores are even worse. By far, across all 8 assessed environments, Black trans women had the worst indicated scores for risks across the board. And by across the board, I mean right now, since 2025 started, and within 2024 as baseline. It's just bad. Interestingly, less than 60%, to be precise, 56.1% of my participants were employed full-time. Nearly half indicated having a disability, which is hugely disproportionate on both of those metrics. I want to stress, though, that regardless of how we present ourselves, you can be what we call in the community a boy motor, where you're transitioning, but when you're in public, you're just wearing hoodies to hide your feminine features and you're pretending you're a man. You can be the most high femme, wears ball gown dresses everywhere, full face of makeup. Statistically speaking, it doesn't matter. Presentation did not have a significant relationship to identified risk. And then visibility, this is huge. In the community, there's a lot of discourse about the idea that visibility is always representation and that both equal power. They equal privilege, they equal responsibility. And I would argue that we all have a responsibility, but for the rest of that, it's just not true. For trans women, visibility is a threat and a function of inevitable violence. Me standing up here today and saying loudly, I am trans, I am a woman, and being visible is a function of inevitable violence against me, not from you all, but from society. But even if I tried to hide, and we'll get into the qualitative data on that here in a second, it's still a threat of violence. So I want to talk about 3 of my qualitative participants who were so kind as to spend an hour with me talking about their lives, answering the 12 questions, and they did this with no compensation. They did this for simply a chance to be heard. I want to start with Jessica, mixed up the pseudonyms. I still want to fucking live, she said. It's just something I haven't had for the longest time. I guess I've also just gained an appreciation of the tenacity that I have in myself to basically be a cockroach and survive all the shit that life's thrown at me. That's what Jessica told me when asked what she had gained since she started becoming herself, since she started her transition. Ashley, on the other hand, talked about the most classical theme of precarity, economic, and told me about her inability to find consistent employment. She said, I'm currently looking for a job, and that's been something. I had several jobs I was fully qualified for where I, did the interviews on the phone, all that, everything was fine. It was going smoothly. Then the moment I have that in-person interview, that's when I stop hearing back. And that's just been kind of a recurring thing for the past few months. Finally, Emily is a PhD in STEM, and space sciences to be specific. And she indicated themes of being at too much risk, especially given her skills and qualifications for her life. That's a really long quote, and I'm almost out of time, so we're going to skip it. So that brings me back to my thesis argument, unredacted this time, revealed. Trans women are women facing patriarchy alone while denied access to women's supports, recognition, literature, and resources. Resources is the big one, and the intersectional effects of that denial sustains their precarity. So when you ask, okay, what did your study do, Artemis? I'll say, it demonstrated these things: all 26 forms of precarity, all 6 themes of precarity, unemployment that is ridiculously high, and that risks and harms are currently increasing. So this brings me to part of my conclusion in my actual thesis paper. The precarity we are forced into is cruel and unusual punishment. Our trans women's crimes is the simple, radical act of proving that the patriarchy and all its constructions, including the gender hierarchy, are brittle through demonstrating the material falseness of that gender hierarchy. That brings me to some people I want to thank today real briefly. Most of them are in this room or in this room virtually. Nahi, who is my thesis advisor. Dr. J, who I believe is here virtually, who taught me how to do rhetorical coding. Dr. Judy, I think she's here virtually too, who was a sounding board for this project. Dr. Hughes from the honors program. Talia Bhatt, whose analysis, she's not here, but her analysis is foundational to my own. My mom, hi mom, others, including many of you who showed up to see me today, and our mentors or supports for me. And that brings me to the final point. If you take nothing else from this thesis, whether the presentation or the paper, you should take this. Open the conversation from the right places changed live conditions. Oh, and check out my CV. That's it. Thank you all.